Welcome everybody to the Native Plant Gardening Q&A with Master Gardener Jane Gulley. I'm Dan Scheinman. I'm the Bird Conservation Director for Audubon, Arkansas. I'm a birder first and foremost, but also I garden with native plants. I have an all Arkansas native yard, and I still have a lot to learn, and I am learning constantly from my friend Jane Gulley. And part of the reason that we are having this Q&A today with Jane is that Governor Hutchinson has declared this week to be Native Plant Week, to celebrate the value of native plants in our yards and beyond. So I hope everyone here is really excited about that, and I'm sure you would love to incorporate more native plants into your yard, and this is a great time to do so. If you have any questions, if you're on Zoom, you can type your questions into the chat box because everybody's on mute. And if you are watching this through Facebook, you can type your questions into the comment box and they'll be relayed to me, and I will relay questions to Jane. Also, just to cover this from the get-go, if you simply want to know a list of recommended plants, you can go to Audubon, Arkansas, or to National Audubon Society's Plants for Birds database. And we'll provide a link for that on Facebook. And then also all the people on Zoom will email you that link and other resources after this webinar. So if you want just to know a list of plants, National Audubon has a Plants for Birds database. If you want to know where to buy plants, we'll just cover that. We'll provide that resource for everybody too, a list of vendors in the state as well as some vendors that cover things nationally, so we don't have to have that question asked today. I would like to introduce our guest, Jane Gulley, who has been a Master Gardener for over 30 years. She has served as president of Pulaski County Master Gardeners. Her project gardens include the Little Rock Audubon Center, where I get to learn from her, Pinnacle Mountain State Park, the Pulaski County Extension Office, Witt Stephens Jr. Central Arkansas Nature Center, and the Pulaski County Alexander Butler Rose Gardens at the courthouse. After getting degrees from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville and Memphis University, she taught high school, American history and English, later started a program on the conservation of bald eagles that became a nationwide model, and Jane has been inducted into the Arkansas Outdoor Hall of Fame. I'm delighted that she's going to share her extensive knowledge about native plants. So again, this is a Q&A, so this depends on you asking the Q's, so Jane has the A's. To get started though, I will ask a few questions that came to me ahead of time via email. So Jane, could you please recommend some shade-loving plants that would be used to screen off an area of a yard, especially evergreen plants?
And the shade-loving and evergreen are two difficult things to come by. Evergreen shrubs for natives are a little bit hard to come by, but there's some that'll work. Yaupon is evergreen. It will take a lot of shade. And I want to talk with my hands. It's hard for me not to talk with my hands.
It's okay. I do it too.
Okay. For the person that sent that in, please, please, please don't just put a row of like Yaupons because something's going to die. They're all not going to make it or grow at the same time. And then it's going to look snaggle tooth. So just from your enjoyment of looking at it, stagger the plants, maybe every fourth one, but you could use Yaupon, you can use American holly. It'll take shade, but it also grows slowly. So you might think about that. And Illicum, I-L-L-I-C-U-M, will take a lot of shade. It's evergreen. It has a fragrance to it. Florida anise is the common name from it. And you might fill in then, and they said evergreen was preferred, but you might find some shrubs like deciduous hollies that wouldn't be evergreen, but if you stagger them with the evergreens toward the back and other things in the front, that would give you a fuller hedge. Do you think that covers that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Good. One down.
And I guess if there's any follow-up questions from that viewer, they can type it into the chat box.
Yes, that'd
So
be good.
another person asks, when preparing an area for a wildflower meadow, is it okay if that area pools with water for a couple of days after it rains, or do they need to fix the drainage?
Okay, I thought along, my first inclination to answer that was no problem, just put plants in that don't mind having wet feet. And sort of an example of that is our rain garden at Audubon. But instead of using forbs, we used shrubs. But there are a lot of plants that will take wet feet. Swamp milkweed, joe pye, sedges. I made a list so I wouldn't. Amsonia, turtlehead, which is one of my favorites, columbine, lizard's tail. You have to watch that. But then at the same time, if you wanted to fill that in, which they said, should they fill that in, that could be expensive because you've got to find some place to make the water go that's going there, and be careful of where you're sending it to. Your neighbors don't want it. So my suggestion would be just leave the low places and work with it. And if you don't want to put a forb in there, you could put a button bush. We even have had success with beauty berries at Audubon being flooded and yet being alive. So that might give you some options to that.
And for everyone's edification, a forb means an herbaceous plant of wildflower.
Yeah, I was trying to sound better than just.
Great, thank you. Another person wants to know how to deal with milkweed aphids.
Oh, I know. I'm trying not to do talks much now, and Cindy Franklin does a wonderful job, and she does it. But when I do talks, I think that's the number one question I get. And so before this, I thought I'm going to look and see if there's anything new that's come out. There's not anything to do. Everything you do, now this is a formula, let's see, I wrote it down, from Monarch Watch, but it'll kill the larvae and the caterpillars. You have to be careful they're not on there or painted on with a paintbrush or something, but it's 1 part Blue Dawn, 1 part alcohol, 1 part white vinegar to a gallon of water. Just like a tablespoon or so of the others. The only thing to do, and this was from Dr. Oberhauser, who's from the University of Minnesota and works with Monarch Watch, you just have to either scrump them off with your fingers. I love Cheetos. I'm always talking about that. And that leaves a residue on your fingers like you've been eating Cheetos and ugly yellow scum. But rub them off with that. You can spray them with a high spray of water. But if you do that, you have to be careful. The monarch eggs will be under the leaves where she stuck them on there. And you don't want to blow those away. Also, I found just from my yard, and I'm going to stop right there for just a second. When I talk about plants, I've been in the same house for 50 years. And so the plants that I talk about are ones that I grow and know. And it doesn't bother me at all to say I don't know something about something. But trying that spray of water, if you don't put your hand or something behind the milkweed plant, you break the stem. So Dr. Oberhauser and Jane Gulley say you can spray with and support the thing and then just pick them off. And the thing to do, don't let it get bad. I walk my yard every morning with a cup of hot tea when I can be out. And just when I see 1 or 2, I try to get them then. If they get ahead of you, forget it.
Well,
they
do
not hurt the caterpillar or the larva. They won't
hurt
them.
Yeah. So the aphid will not hurt the monarchs at all. But how much damage do they do to the plant?
That's exactly right. And it takes them depends on if your plant is new, it can be bad. If it's an established plant, eventually they can kill it. Another suggestion is don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Spread your plants out in different places in your yard. There are probably going to be a couple of places that the aphids find more appealing than someplace else, and maybe that'll help. And that's sort of wishful thinking, and it's an experiment, but I mean, it can't, anything will help. They're like pennies and ants. They just kind of go together.
Right. All right. Recommendations for plants to grow on a rocky slope.
Okay. One of my very favorite, if you are looking at native plants and it says for erosion control, that's a good thing to go for a rocky slope. I don't know if the rocky slope has any shade on it or not, but there are a couple of different native dogwoods that are used for erosion control. They would need, maybe if there's some pine trees or something on there already, that would help. And I'm trying to think of my very favorite plant, and it's left me. That's the problem I have. But it's got red. We have it. Hummingbirds love it, and it can be used for erosion control. But Google plants, native plants for erosion control, and whatever comes up, you can use on the rocky slopes.
Yeah. And there's glade-loving plants too that would be good. Like
even some of the there are a lot that you can choose from, and I don't know if you're thinking more shrubs or more forbs or trees or how. And another situation, even if it's a rocky slope, is there any sort of water supply there? Is there an irrigation that sprays that part of the yard? Or that makes a huge difference too on what you're looking for. Beware at some of the goldenrods, anything that says they spread by stolons a lot, they'll pick out places to go. The thing to think about is the things that will grow on that rocky slope are going to have roots that if you get tired of it being there, you're going to have a horrendous time eradicating any of it. And you need to be sure your slope doesn't go to your neighbor's
right
house.
You want to give them some plants that
they're going to get it too.
Yeah. Thank you. So another question is there a way, how do you tell which plants are okay to prune back in the middle of the season and which ones don't tolerate pruning? Oh,
you're talking to the pruning queen.
Yeah, I know. You definitely give a lot of our plants at Audubon a haircut.
I do give haircuts. And the easiest way to do that, and I have a sheet that tells exactly the families and when to cut. Know your plant and know when it blooms. If it blooms late in the summer, if it's an aster, some of the goldenrods, now you have to know if it's a goldenrod that blooms midsummer or if it's one that blooms late. If they bloom midsummer, you can give them a haircut early spring. When they get up to about a foot, cut them down to about 8 inches, or you can do like when they get 6 inches, cut them down to 3. What that does, it'll keep them from flopping over. Now these are ones, not your spring bloomers, We're talking summer bloomers. I'll talk spring bloomers in just a minute. Summer bloomers, if it blooms middle of summer, cut it once early. If it blooms late summer, I mean August, well, like some of the asters late into that, you can cut them once early spring and then once and sometimes even twice after that, and just cut them by about 2 to 3 inches. And it won't, sometimes it'll make them bloom a little bit later, but it'll keep them from flopping over. Now your early spring bloomers, you do them just like you do your shrubs. After they bloom, now keep in mind, you're going to sacrifice seed production. but some of them must be, like Amsonias. If you don't cut them after they bloom, they flop, and then weeds and even little oak trees will come up in them. You have a horrible mess. Some of the ironweed is like that too. So spring after bloom, midsummer once before midsummer bloom, late summer, early fall, twice before bloom.
Great. That's a great
formula.
Great. Thank you. Can you recommend some plants that will be good for window boxes, especially shade, afternoon sun locations?
Okay, you sent me that, and I was so glad you did. I have never thought about that before. I've thought about window boxes. I don't have any, but I will say this about window boxes. We had a speaker that talked about window boxes at a Master Gardener thing, and then my neighbor across the street had the problem and asked me, if you have a wood house, don't let your window box touch the wood on your house. You need to put something metal, or you can screw a little piece of PVC the long way. This is hard to, on there, so that just a little bit of it touches the house, even if the window box is plastic, because moisture builds up between the window box and the house, and you can rot the wood. The other suggestion is have window boxes that you can take down for the winter months and don't leave them up the whole time. My neighbor left theirs up, and theirs is a stone and wood house, and it rotted the window frames.
Wow.
Underneath. So think about that on your window boxes. Okay. The window box that said it had morning shade and afternoon sun, which is a booger to work with, because afternoon sun, and then it's reflecting off the thing, so it's really hot. But coreopsis, and I don't know if they want annuals or perennials, but I hope they're not going to leave the window box up. But even if you took it down and set it down someplace, you could put perennials in it. But there are annual coreopsis. There's let's see, I made a little list over here of things that they might want to be. Any of the Gaillardia, that takes a lot of sun. But then I was thinking, on a window box, you need something that hangs down. And you might try on the one that gets afternoon sun, passion flower vine, because you can just cut them and it won't hurt it. And you could let that hang down. It has such interesting foliage, so that would be good. Now, the one that gets the no sun, from what you sent me, I just didn't get. That's a little bit harder. Maidenhair fern doesn't. And the other thing about a window box is you have to be careful that your plants aren't going to get so tall you can't see out your window, or maybe you want a screen. If you want a screen, and the ones that get afternoon sun, you could put iris in there, would be pretty, that spike, because you want a variation in foliage. You don't want it just straight across. Okay, the one that gets no sun is really hard, except I think you could try the passion flower for the hang down there, just because my passion flower's up in the woods in dense shade, or a lot of shade, and it helps it. Yeah. Lizard tail could be in there. Maidenhair fern.
I'll tell you what, you'll give the list to me, and we'll make sure that resource goes out to.
I'm talking too long is what you're trying to say.
There's lots of questions, so we'll want to move on. So yeah, I'm making notes to get lists from you. Window box plants. Okay. Great.
Okay.
So another question is, as a beginner, are there some plants that are easier to grow in cultivation than others?
Yes, there are. And when you look through, the problem is the ones that are the easiest to grow are also the most thuggish. And I think that's one of the first things you learn when you garden. And I have a sheet that we will pass on, because when catalogs or when you're looking, they don't say this is going to take over your yard and possibly your entire neighborhood. They seldom, there's code words, and it'll say naturalized settings, woodland gardens, wildflower gardens, freely self-seed, use colonizes. Those are all words that should scare you when you read those. Some of the tried and trues are not real easy. Coneflowers are really easy to grow if you get them in the right place. And the thing to do, just because it's a native plant, it's just like any other plant. If it likes sun, it wants sun in your yard. If it likes shade, it wants shade in your yard. So be sure you match the basics up. If it likes alkaline soil, you're going to have a hard time growing it in Little Rock because we primarily have acidic soil. Take a soil sample if you're just getting started. It's free. You can
do
look
cooperative extension.
Yeah, and we will send them that. But you need to do that before you start. Thing.
And I would let everyone know that with gardening, whether it's natives or not, you're going to kill some stuff. You're going to put something in the ground. It's not going to work. It's going to die. Don't plant that one again.
That's right. And I always say, make
risks.
notes. And it's so easy to do because when I walk the yard, I just on my phone, I just put stuff on there. And we've done that. That's the good thing about Audubon, Arkansas, Witt Stephens, those ones that we've done. I tried to keep notes month by month, when we cut, what happened when we cut, when something died, why we thought it died, etc. Because you don't want to keep making the same mistakes over and over. It's costly.
That's a great point.
Financially.
Note taking. Right. Okay. And follow up to that is, would you recommend starting from plugs or seed? And what's the advantage to plugs versus seeds?
About 4,000 times success rate with plugs than seeds.
Plugs better than seeds.
Yes, because when you're, for one thing, when you doing your seeds, and unless you invest in a nice seed, if you have a greenhouse, then you're probably far advanced than me, so you don't need this information. Or you've started them in your hall closet like I used to do. I was telling someone the other day when our son was 11, he was going to call the police and turn me in for growing marijuana because he got mad at me for something else. And I had all these floodlights and everything in the hall closet. It did look like quite a production, but they were plant seeds. But anyway, seeds are hard to do. And if you put them, just sow them outside like Carl Hunter always talked about, not just the seeds you want will come up, because once you disturb the soil, the seeds that have been dormant in there from years, from whatever was there, are going to come up. And then you think, which of the seeds, what of all these things do I want and what do I do? Clear it out and put plugs in, or start with small plants and identify. And then just like you did at Audubon, try to clump things so that you, number one, it's more aesthetically appealing. Number one, pollinators like things clumped more than they do individual plants. They tend to go to them better. Number two, it's more appealing to us. But number three, you can tell more what you have. That way, if it doesn't look like the other 5 that you have in there, pull that one out.
Right. Yeah.
Plus,
right. And if you had seeds, you could plant those into containers or pots and let them come up, and then plant the plugs in the ground.
Cindy Franklin can check. She is the seed expert in doing that. What I used to do, when you buy a tray of like 3-inch pots and they come in the thing, I would put potting soil in that and just put my seeds in them and set them outside. I did discover that I had to put chicken wire over the top of them, and then they would come up and I'd have, purple coneflower, whatever it was I wanted in there. But plugs are so much easier.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So note to everybody, don't worry about the time limit. I set it to 12:30. We're going to keep on going. There's lots of questions, so we're going to keep trying to get on to more questions. We'll go for
Okay, and I'll be quicker.
Yeah, okay. So Are there any Arkansas native or Ozark native plants that come in bulbs or corms for planting?
Yes, there are. I'm trying to think right now, but there are some, spider lilies, or I don't know. I can't say the Latin names of anything because I can't pronounce them, but
Okay.
there you can go on and just list down there and put corms and they'll come up. So the iris aren't corms, but we have several different kinds of iris that have the bulb thing, but there are corms and there are bulbs that you can use. I was trying to think. I think I wrote down one of those over here for some. Anyway, go ahead to the next one because that wasn't the answer.
Yeah, we'll be sending out lists of plants to folks, so don't you worry. We don't have to get too deep in.
And while you're saying that, I love the Audubon site. It really is good, but they don't give you the option of choosing shade or sun.
Yeah,
so you have to read,
database, you mean.
You have to read through all of them, but you can narrow it down to evergreens and stuff like that. So that would be something, that you'll have to read all. The lists are always good, but you have to look, and they do have good pictures. Look at the ones you like and then do more research would be my suggestion.
Right.
And I've got a thing on corms here. Just a minute. Go ahead. Go to the next one while I'm looking. I've got a cheat book here. This is a good book. Armitage's Native Plants. Just
move it over a little bit more. Yeah. Thank you.
It's fun to read. He is a really good, fun writer, but he has good lists in the back. So it gives some ideas too. Go ahead now, and I'll be looking thinking at the same time.
All right. How would you recommend preparing an area for planting that is in a wooded area in your backyard?
Well, I have that in my backyard. And what I did, I back up to the Little Rock Waterworks woods. And as squatters' rights, I've taken over a lot of the city's land now by just working back that way. And I don't know how dense their woods are, but I was surprised at how in my yard I just have shale. And that's because 50 years ago when the guy built the house, he just scraped everything off. So for 50 years, I've been leaving leaves and building up soil. When I go up into the woods, it's amazing to me. There's a good layer of soil up there because all the leaves have just accumulated over the time. You need to pay attention like I didn't on some of the things, because in an area where the trees are smaller, remember, they're going to keep growing and they might have a tendency to shade out what you plant. But find plants that like shade, that don't need supplemental watering. Some of the viburnums that we have, possum, black haw, they just do great.
But
so
you have to prepare that area. How would you prepare the area before planting?
Not do much. Pull out any, and I don't know if they're talking about shrubs. I wish we could talk to people. If they're talking about shrubs, you don't really need to do much. I put a couple of spice bushes back in there, just where there's a clearing. Just put in what you call it, buckeyes. They'll do great in the shade. Just stick them in. Now, if you're doing small plants, you might want to clear out your area so that the weeds don't compete with what you're putting in. But you don't want to do a bunch, and don't fertilize. A lot of the natives like that soil, and if you give them fertilizer thinking, oh, it's a baby I need, they'll just get sprawly and limp and pitiful, and bugs will get them. Just let them be. Now, if they're new, you're going to have to haul water in milk jugs or something up until you get them established, and it takes 2 years first year it sleeps. Remember, we went over this at Audubon. This was
Yeah.
our first year it sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps. So the sleeping year and the creeping year, they need supplemental water. Okay.
Right, thank you.
For that, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
And get rid of invasive species too. If you've got privet, Japanese honeysuckle, kill that stuff thoroughly first, but then go planting.
And then, yes, and there are two, this is from the Brooklyn, this one about invasive ones, and this is the non-invasive plants of non-native invasives from the Forest Service, and that's a good one to look at,
Right.
so you can tell what you want to get rid of.
And we'll get those books from Jane, and we'll again have those resources available to everybody. So you don't have to write it down right now. Someone asked, Clover is taking over their beds, pathways, and lawn. How do you control or get rid of clover?
Well, why do they want to get rid of it? I mean, what do they want to put in there? That's a funny thing, because I was with a group of people just the other, we weren't close. We were texting and stuff, and that person wanted to grow clover to get it started, because it blooms. It's an early bloomer, so it's good for pollinators early on. It's healthy. It's, it's good. So, I guess if it's that far along, I hate to say this, but you'd probably have to use some sort of chemical remover stuff, or try to digging it out. If you leave any of the little crumbs or anything, that just spreads it more. I don't have for that. I really don't.
Well, maybe repeated mowing, and that might help over time. Again, if you got a weed problem, you want to take care of the weed problem before you plant anything. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot harder to control weeds. And also, Jane, you say mulch, 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 right? Deep mulch. So at the Little Rock Audubon Center, you have us put at least 3 inches of mulch on everything, and then you dig your little native in there, and the mulch keeps a lot of the weeds down.
And you don't want it to get up to the stems, though.
Right. Keep the mulch from the stems of the plants.
But if you have established clover, and this is a sad thing, I speak from experience from violets, just woodland violets that my mother told me many, 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 many years ago that I didn't want. And they're so sweet when they're in bloom that I thought she didn't know what she was talking about. And they have taken over my front yard. I put mulch, I've done everything, and they just come up. So, and I don't know if clover is as hardy as that or not, but I go with my weed eater. And if you keep cutting the tops off of something enough and they can't assimilate any nutrients, they will eventually die. Right. So setting your mower real low or using a weed eater. I have a battery weed eater that it doesn't count like Ann Schweitzer's real weed eater that she uses, but I can get stuff like that down pretty low.
Well, if you do have to turn to herbicides, what do you recommend for herbaceous and woody plants?
Plain old Roundup. Be sure you put like Dawn in it, or the sticker thing that they sell separately, so that it'll stick to the leaves better. I just hate, we've had to use it when we got started, even at Audubon when we first started, because there weren't enough. We needed an army of people to work, if you could say that, if anybody wants to come work anyway. And we're going to need them again because we haven't been able to do anything in months, and it's gotten ahead of us. But we try not, I don't like to use that at home. And the whole key is, if you garden, it's work. And that means keeping ahead of things. Right. There's no easy, just because you're using natives does not mean it's not work.
Absolutely. Yeah. In my yard, I hand pull weeds, hand pull the tree seedlings, cut back standing dead vegetation, control some of the aggressive native plants
Yeah.
that we got. So yeah, it's definitely not necessarily easier to plant with natives, but natives have the benefit of providing
Exactly.
insects
That
and the birds. So yeah. And then,
tell them on the Audubon site, for the plants, it shows what birds are attracted to that. And it's fun to look up the birds that go with it too. That, since everybody's home now with kids, that'd be a great fun thing to do just to pass the time. You can do their sounds and what they, it's fun. So that's
yeah. In the Plants for Birds database, it lists the birds that benefit, and then there's links to the actual species profiles that have the sounds the birds make and all.
Yeah, it's great.
Learning about two birds with one page.
Yeah.
And also when it comes to herbiciding woody plants, shrubs, and vines, you do hack and squirt. So cut them off at the base and spray the stump. And you may, for some of them like privet, may have to spray or pull multiple times because they're tough buggers and they will try to come back again and again before you get them out.
And this is if the stem is large enough and you have a hand drill, you can drill a little hole down into the stump that you've made.
And put a grenade in there?
Yeah. And fill it with Roundup, and then you can put a tin can lid on top of it, or if you got it down short enough, just sit the tin can over it so nothing can get into it. And that seems to set them back some. But with privet, it's going to take more than one application.
Yep.
It just is.
Yeah. Another question is, how severely can you prune viburnums after they finish blooming?
You need to prune them fairly soon after they bloom. Now, remember, you won't get your berries if you do that.
But how far back do you cut them?
As much as you want. The ones that were down the side of Audubon that had gone plumb berserky, as they would say, we cut way down, and they'll just come back up nice and full. So don't worry about it. You would like to, if you're doing it like pruning every other year or keeping up with the schedule, you shouldn't have to do them by more than a third. But if they've gotten out of hand, just cut them and remember, you need to cut them lower than you want them because they're going to grow during that season. And then be sure, after you've cut them good, you don't need to put a lot of fertilizer on because you just cut them because they were growing too much.
Right.
But be sure if we hit a dry spell, that they get water during that time. Right. And some don't take much, but there's a viburnum for every need of every place, as the saying goes. So they're hardy.
Yeah, it's one of the big surprises that I've learned by working alongside you at Audubon is that some plants like beautyberry and buttonbush, you can cut down to the stump and they'll just come back big and full next year like you never did anything.
Well, it depends on if they bloom on new wood or not.
Oh, right.
The beautyberries and the buttonbush do, and they actually benefit from that unless they get too thick. Then you have to thin out in between. Okay.
Great, thanks. Someone asks, with winters being so mild lately, do you recommend stratifying milkweed and other seeds before planting rather than fall sowing? And if you do stratify, how do you do that?
Stratifying means they have to have a certain amount of cold and then warm, they have to go through a cooling process and then a warming up and then in between. Or I don't have any trouble because my milkweed, I'm very fortunate, reseeds and it comes up in the weirdest places and it has a taproot. But if you get it when it's little bitty, you can move it around you can move it where you want. Don't dig it up though after it gets bigger because you'll kill it because of the taproot. The stratifying, you need to, number one, read how much cooling time you need, like to put it You can use dry sand and put the seeds in your refrigerator. You can do peat moss. There are a lot of different ways of doing it. No, you have to plan how far out you need to have that done before you can put them in the ground. And we have not had very cold winters. The bad thing we've had are weird frosts or cold snaps at weird times. Like we had one real early this year, and everyone's hydrangeas that have the regular grandma hydrangeas have gotten zapped. So my suggestion on that would be, I would tend to do it before I planted them in the spring.
Right, but
I do like doing some seeds. I haven't done milkweed, but I think that's what I would do.
so you're saying it's getting mild enough now that if you planted seeds in the ground or in pots and left them outside over the winter, they may not get stratified. So you've got to do it yourself. And to do so, that's typically done in the fridge, right? For a certain period.
Yes, but I don't
mixture.
I don't agree with that. If you're going to do them, I was thinking if you were determined to do it in the refrigerator, I would still just put mine out, because mine are coming up, which would mean it worked in nature. They just didn't happen to be in a pot. They just came up where they wanted to be. And I've not seen anything diminished from that. So if you want to do it in the refrigerator, I'm saying I would time it so that they would be ready to plant in early spring. But my best luck for doing things like that, if I wanted to, would be to put them in pots outside and just leave them, but put something over the pot so the squirrels don't.
Right. Trying to make less work for yourself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and speaking of squirrels getting in your pots, if you pot buckeye seeds, the squirrels are going to find them and dig them up and eat them. So definitely cover over your buckeye seedlings.
Yes.
I mean, before they come up.
On my pots, what I ended up doing was I got boards that are, I think they might be 1 by 10, and I cut them and hammered them together to make a rectangle that 2 of those plastic trays that hold pots that are 3 inches across will fit in. And then I put hardware cloth on top of it, and I just sit that down over that, and it makes it, there's room for the plants to come up a little bit, and by the time they're up, they're about ready to plant, and I can just sit that thing off, and it keeps stuff from getting in there.
Yeah. Oh, and another tip that I learned from you, Jane, is when you are starting a new garden and you put your plants in the ground, it's nice to have a wooden frame around that area, especially if you're clumping. If you got 3 milkweeds, 3 Amsonias or whatever, wooden frame around that clump of 3 plants, so that when it's time to weed eat, whatever, you know where your plants are before they even come up, and you don't do something bad to that little spot. You don't spray there. Those plants are protected by that little wooden rectangles, all you need around them.
We did 1 by 1s or 1 by 2s, but flat. They're not
right
up really. And that worked because, we've had Girl Scout groups and different groups that didn't have any background at all in gardening. And you can sit them in front of one of those little squares and say, this is what we're trying to save. Anything that doesn't look like this, you pull out. And they really people enjoy doing that because They're not panicked they're going to mess up. And they would just visit and laugh, and we get a lot of work done. So and
also, if a plant spreads by seeds or runners and you want it to be in a controlled area, you just say to yourself, okay, if it's inside this square frame, leave it. If it comes outside, pull it out, even if it's that native plant. Tidy looking.
Native plants, and somebody sent in that they were going to start a prairie. That's one of the hardest things to do because plants are thuggish. And if you put out 20 plants in about 4 or 5 years, you're going to have 5 plants represented. There's some in there that are just going to take over the world. You have to manage. And remember, prairies by nature were burned periodically and all that. I mean, there's management and work involved in doing it. Or you're going to have all poison ivy because birds love that, and then they drop the seeds in where you're working, and privet. That's what you end up with.
So a follow-up to the evergreen shrub question was, which shrubs do you recommend in shade? Which shrubs that are evergreen and provide a cover, a barrier, which ones will grow in shade?
The ones that will grow in shade are the Florida Anise. Is that how you say it? Illicum. I can't pronounce it. I've got some in my backyard, and you can cut that and shape it and do anything you want to, but it'll do shade. Wax myrtle will take shade.
Oh, yeah.
And wax myrtle is wonderful. The problem with wax myrtle is controlling the wax myrtle because it grows so fast. Now, it might grow less fast. It might not be quite as vigorous in shade, but it's still going to send out runners, suckers. And if you have a way that you can mow that and do it, but it smells good. Birds love it. So that's a real good one that you can use. And it likes shade.
Well, the eastern form of the yellow-rumped warbler is called the myrtle warbler because they eat myrtle berries.
That's right. And they used to make candles out of the wax myrtles, and they were of such poor quality they called them Arkansas candles. And that was one of my American history stories. It wasn't very flattering, but those little berries are actually like little power bars for the birds because that's fatty in there, and it gives them that energy that they need when they're migrating. So those two would be and yaupon. Now yaupon, you need a male and a female to have the red berries. Right. But all three of those will take shade, and all three of them are evergreen.
Great, thank you. Someone wants to know if you have suggestions for low ground cover in a bed that gets heavy afternoon sun.
Ooh, heavy afternoon sun, low ground cover. Well, how low do they want the ground?
How low can you go?
If depending on how low you want it, there's some coreopsis that don't get very tall that would take all that sun. I wonder if they have a supplemental water supply at all.
Less than 12 inches, she says.
Okay, there might be a coreopsis in it. Ooh, I don't know. That's a hard one. And they want a solid ground cover. Partridge berry, but it would take too long. You'd get too many weeds in it before you could clear it out. Let's skip that one.
Follow up.
I think I failed on that one.
Okay. That's okay. We're putting you on the spot here.
On shade, get them to ask about shade ground cover. I've got some.
Someone wants to know generally, how can you tell what's a weed and what's a good plant?
That is a wonderful $1 million question. The answer to that is, have you ever heard the story, one man's trash is another man's treasure? Well, a weed is something you don't want in that spot. And it really, certain things, in fact, milkweed that we farm or used to farm down in South Arkansas, and everybody hated milkweed in the pastures and stuff, and and now we're all into milkweed. And I haven't discussed this with my brother-in-law who managed the farm and did the stuff, but I used to dig up stuff down there and take it home, and he used to just make fun of me for you know, he said, I'm out here backhoeing, getting rid of brush hog, doing all this stuff. And he said, you know, if I just turn you loose, I won't have any work to do because you're going to dig up all this mess. So weed is something that it depends on your perspective. We've been talking about thistle as being desirous. Well, if you farm, thistle is not good. Milkweed is not. So passion flower, they hate it in pastures and stuff. So if it's where you don't want it, it's a weed.
Yeah. And if it's growing in a spot that you haven't been doing any management or maintenance on, you've never touched, it's probably a typical lawn weed. Probably something that's just spreads itself around, and you might want to get rid of that. And also, particularly for shrubs, at least, if it's green in the roadsides and the forests, it's probably a non-native like saltbush or Japanese honeysuckle or Chinese.
Or privet or Japanese honeysuckle or one of those. And the thing to do is have one of these books that you can look at the picture and identify it as if it's an invasive something that might be spreading and moving our native plants out. So,
right. Also, let's see, another question about low-growing natives is what will be good to use as a border with a neighbor's yard where you've got part sun?
A border, I wonder if they want an evergreen. Bush's poppy mallow makes a nice mound. Flag iris, you could, you know, that would give a little a picture of a division if you didn't want something real tall there, but that would show up. And I don't know if they want New Jersey tea. That's the one I was trying to think of as an erosion control. New Jersey tea it's a nice little shrub, and it offers protein supply when hummingbirds are nesting. And it's hardy and good. And it gets the name New Jersey tea because it was used as tea supplement when we threw the tea in the water during the Revolution, and they used that as a tea supplement. They also use yopon as coffee. Anyway, that would make a nice low mounding little bush that you could use as a division between, if you want something a little bit shrubby. And it likes sun. Oh, now what was it, sun or shade?
Part sun. That
would be good. That would be good. Any of those would be good. And you can always, like purple coneflowers, cut them early and they won't get as tall. So you could, you know, do that and pinch stuff back and keep it the height that you want it to be.
So what are some of your favorite plants for attracting hummingbirds and bees?
For attracting hummingbirds and bees, my all-time favorite is when I had never seen it before, and I was doing an Eagle program, and I went through Dumas, Arkansas, and I saw a plant that stuff was just, I was driving and saw it, and I just stopped and I went up to the door and knocked on the door and said, what is that? And the woman called it hummingbird bells. And she said, do you want some of it? And I said, yes. And she pulled up a piece of it and I brought it home. I've had it forever. And it's Turk's cap is what Malaviaceus, whatever the name, but we call it Turk's cap because hummingbirds absolutely love it, but so do so many other things. And Thomas and I sit on our porch swing every night until it gets freezing cold. And right now, those buffalo gnats have been out and we've had to come back in. But those are about the only two times we're not out there. And I started calling hummingbird bells, when that Turk's cap is up, and I have several of them around the yard, and the hummingbirds will protect that just like they do a hummingbird feeder. but there's always so much stuff, and we sit there and just talk about all the stuff that's going to those bushes. It almost looks like the bush is moving. There'll be so much.
Yeah.
Bees, moths, everything likes them.
Well, sure. I mean, that's a great thing about natives is that the vast majority of them attract bees and other native pollinating insects. Then for hummingbirds, they also go to a variety of plants, even milkweeds and
Oh, yeah.
but of course anything red and tubular like trumpet honeysuckle, red buckeye, those are all great plants for them.
Well, and right by the porch swing is the Turk's cat, but right by that on a big arbor is a major wheeler, the semi-purpose honeysuckle, the red, and they'll go to one and then go back to the other and back and forth. And almost every year I have a cardinal that nests in that the honeysuckle right there by the thing. So I would say if I just enjoy that because there's so, and they bloom for such a long period of time. And if it grows over toward the gate, when I'm walking through, I just take my clippers and clip it off. It doesn't mind, it's just easy going, easy care. Nothing seems to bother it.
Another question is, what is a good non-chemical alternative for killing poison ivy?
I would say a sharp hoe, as Carl Hunter always said, there's no problem in a garden that a sharp hoe can't solve. I'm definitely allergic to poison ivy. And we have the woods in the back, and almost my husband, who's not a gardener at all, every fall, Thomas sits in the swing and says, "That's just beautiful. What is that?" And it is there are a couple of trees in the woods that are covered in poison ivy. And in the fall, it's a beautiful red color. There's Virginia creeper back there too that's also real pretty. But the tree that he thinks is just gorgeous is in the Waterworks woods, covered in poison ivy. And he's asked me for 50 years, what is that? It looks so pretty in the fall. But then, of course, the birds eat it, so I get little poison ivy things coming up. And I put a Wonder Bread sack on my arm and go out and pull them up. I don't know of anything that would.
Well, one of our viewers is recommending using vinegar on a hot sunny day.
That might do. I had read, and we tried vinegar at Audubon, and the vinegar that I read about online that they use is a much higher concentrate vinegar than I can buy at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. But the other day, when I could still go to the grocery store, I happened to see, it was at Clover, and I think it might have been Heinz, and it said cleaning vinegar. And I didn't know if that would be stronger than my normal white distilled vinegar that I use for a lot of things. But the hot sun might be the difference. That would be, why not try it?
Yeah, give it a try. All right, well, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Jane. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I want to last say that if you do want to buy some natives, Audubon, Arkansas has a native plant sale coming up on June 6th. It's going to be a pre-order online ahead of time, and then come pick up your plants on June 6th. We are working on the details. We're going to have multiple native plant vendors from around the state providing their plants. So stay tuned to ar.audubon.org/events. Also Audubon Arkansas's Facebook page, where we will post details when we have them all set for you. Again, thank you, everyone, and happy Native Plant Week.
That's right.
Plants and natives.